The snow leopard had been gone for 3 years when it returned to Emma Frost's ridge, and the first thing she noticed wasn't its presence. It was a sound. A low, rhythmic scraping that pulled her from sleep at dawn, persistent as a heartbeat carved into stone. She lay still in the predawn dark, listening. The cabin creaked around her with familiar voices. Settling timbers, wind threading through gaps in chinked logs, the soft exhale of ash in the woodstove. But beneath it all, that other sound continued. Scratch, pause, scratch. Deliberate, intentional. Emma pushed herself upright, joints protesting the cold. 52 years of mountain winters had carved themselves into her bones, leaving behind an ache that never fully disappeared. She pulled on wool socks, then boots, moving to the morning routine that had sustained her through 2 decades of solitude. Water from the basin, splash of ice against her face. The shock that reminded her she was still alive, still here, still surviving. Through the window, the Rockies stretched in every direction, peaks cutting sharp silhouettes against the pale sky. This high up, the world existed in shades of white and gray and the deep blue-black of shadows that never fully retreated. Beautiful, merciless. The only home she had left. The scratching stopped. Emma froze, her breath fogging the glass. She scanned the clearing beyond her porch, the slope dropping away toward the valley she rarely visited anymore. Nothing moved. Then, at the edge of the treeline where granite cliffs rose like broken teeth, she saw it, pale fur against darker stone, a shape too large to be a lynx, too deliberate to be a trick of morning light. The snow leopard sat on its haunches before the cliff face, one massive paw raised, and as she watched, it reached forward and dragged its claws down the rock. The sound carried across the frozen air. Scratch. Emma's throat closed. She knew that animal, knew the pattern of rosettes along its shoulder, the slight crook in its tail from an old break that hadn't healed quite straight. 3 years ago, she'd found it caught in a poacher's wire snare, half dead from blood loss and exposure, and spent 6 weeks nursing it back to life in the shed behind her cabin. She'd named it Ghost, though she tried not to name it at all, tried not to let herself care about something she knew she'd have to release. The day she'd opened the shed door and watched it disappear into mountains, she'd told herself it was better this way. Better for Ghost to be wild and free than dependent on a woman who had nothing left to give. Now it was back. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story is touching you already, make sure you're subscribed. I've got something extra special saved for tomorrow. Emma grabbed her coat and stepped onto the porch, the cold hitting her like a physical blow. Her breath crystallized instantly. The thermometer nailed to the cabin wall read 15 below, and that was without the wind chill factored in. She pulled her hood up and started toward the cliff, boots crunching through snow that had fallen during the night. Ghost watched her approach but didn't flee. That alone sent warning bells through Emma's mind. Wild animals didn't wait for humans. They ran or they attacked, or they vanished like smoke. They didn't sit patiently while a woman crossed 50 yards of open ground. She stopped 20 feet away, close enough to see the steam of Ghost's breath, the intelligence in those pale gold eyes that haunted her dreams for 3 years. "You shouldn't be here," Emma said, her voice rough from disuse. She spoke aloud so rarely now that words felt like stones in her mouth. "It's not safe. The Forest Service still patrols sometimes, and if they see you—" Ghost turned back to the cliff face and scratched again. 3 long scrapes, claws leaving white marks on the dark granite. Then it looked at her, head cocked, waiting. Emma's heart hammered. This wasn't random behavior. This was communication. She moved closer, slowly, hands visible and empty. Ghost remained still, though every muscle beneath that thick coat tense with readiness. When Emma reached the cliff, she pressed her palm against the stone where Ghost had been scratching. Cold, solid, nothing unusual about it. She looked at Ghost, the leopard's eyes fixed on a specific point, higher up, just above Emma's head. She followed the gaze and saw it, a hairline crack in the rock, so thin it was almost invisible. Snow had packed into it, concealing it further, but now that she was looking, she could trace its path. Not a natural fissure. Too straight. Too deliberate. Her pulse quickened. She scraped at the snow with her fingernails, packing falling away in chunks. The crack widened, revealing edges that had been smoothed by tools, not weather. Emma's mind raced. She'd lived on this ridge for 20 years, walked past this cliff face hundreds of times. How had she never noticed this? Because you stopped looking, a voice whispered in her head. You stopped caring about anything beyond the next day's survival. Ghost made a sound, low and rumbling. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr. Emma glanced at it and saw something in the leopard's posture she recognized. Urgency. The same tension it had carried the night she'd found it in the snare, fighting to stay alive. What is it? Emma whispered. What are you trying to show me? She dug into her coat pocket for the knife she always carried and worked the blade into the crack. The stone resisted, then suddenly gave way with a soft, grinding sound. A section of rock the size of her fist shifted inward, revealing darkness behind it. Not a crack, an opening. Emma's breath caught. She widened the gap, pulling chunks of carefully fitted stone free, and cold air exhaled from the cliff face like a living thing. Not cave cold, which would have smelled of earth and bat guano and stagnant water. This air carried something else, a metallic tang like old blood, and underneath it, something organic. Paper, leather, things that shouldn't exist in a sealed mountain. Ghost stood and pressed against Emma's side, solid and warm despite the morning cold. The contact shocked her. This animal that should have been completely wild was leaning into her like a domestic cat seeking comfort, or offering it. Emma's hands trembled as she cleared more stone. The opening grew larger, revealing a passage that angled downward into the cliff. Someone had built this, hidden it, sealed it from the outside world, and left it to be forgotten. But Ghost had remembered. She pulled out her headlamp and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. The passage walls were too smooth to be natural. Carved by tools, she could still see chisel marks on the granite. Wooden support beams, dark with age, held up the ceiling. A mining tunnel, maybe. The Rockies were full of them, forgotten remnants of the silver rush that had brought men into these mountains a century ago. But miners didn't hide their work. They marked it, claimed it, fought over it. This tunnel had been deliberately concealed. Emma looked at Ghost. The leopard's eyes reflected her headlamp, turning them into two golden moons. You want me to go in there? It wasn't a question. Ghost turned and took 3 steps into the passage, then looked back over its shoulder, waiting. Every survival instinct Emma had developed over 2 decades of mountain living screamed at her to walk away. Sealed spaces were sealed for a reason. Going into unmarked tunnels alone, without proper equipment or anyone knowing where she was, violated every rule she'd learned. But Ghost had come back. After 3 years of wilderness, of freedom, of living the life it was meant to live, it had returned to her ridge and led her here. That meant something. It had to mean something. Emma took a breath that tasted of stone and secrets, and stepped into the darkness. The tunnel descended at a gentle angle, the walls pressing close enough that Emma could touch both sides if she extended her arms. The air grew warmer as they went deeper, which made no sense. It should have gotten colder, not warmer. But she could feel heat rising from somewhere below, subtle but undeniable. Ghost moved ahead of her, a pale shape in the beam of her headlamp, paused silent on the stone floor. The tunnel had been swept clean at some point, cleared of the dust and debris that should have accumulated over decades. Recently, Emma realized with a jolt, someone had been here recently. The thought sent ice down her spine. She slowed, listening for any sound beyond her own breathing and Ghost's soft padding. Nothing, but the silence felt occupied, as if the tunnel itself was holding its breath. The passage turned sharply left, and suddenly opened into a chamber. Emma stopped at the threshold, her headlamp beam sweeping across a space that shouldn't exist. The chamber was enormous, easily 40 feet across, the ceiling lost in darkness above her, but it was what filled the space that froze her in place. Equipment, modern equipment. Computers sat on folding tables, their screens dark, but cables still connected to portable generators. Charts covered one wall, detailed topographical maps of surrounding mountains marked with symbols Emma didn't recognize. Weather instruments hung from the ceiling, sophisticated devices that looked like they belonged in a research facility, not a hidden cave. And in the center of it all, a cage. Not a small cage. A massive enclosure made of reinforced steel, the kind used for containing large predators. The door stood open, hanging from one twisted hinge. Something had broken out, or been released. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. She took one step into the chamber, then another, her boots whispering against the smooth floor. Ghost circled the cage warily, hackles raised, a growl building in its chest. What is this place? Emma breathed. She moved to the nearest table and found papers scattered across its surface. Research notes, written in tight, precise handwriting. She picked up the top sheet, angling it toward her headlamp. Subject demonstrates unprecedented adaptability to high-altitude conditions. Respiratory capacity 40% above normal range. Temperature regulation suggests genetic modification was successful. Recommend extending observation period before release. Emma's hands shook. Subject. They were talking about an animal. In that cage, she looked at Ghost, really looked, and saw what she'd been too overwhelmed to process before. The leopard was bigger than any snow leopard should be. Not by much, but enough to notice now that she was paying attention. Its chest was deeper, its paws broader, and its eyes. Those eyes held too much intelligence, too much understanding. They made you, Emma whispered. Someone made you. Ghost's ears flattened. It moved to the far side of the chamber, where another passage opened into deeper darkness, and scratched at the floor. The same deliberate motion it had used outside. 3 scrapes, pause. 3 more. Emma followed, her mind reeling. If Ghost was some kind of genetic experiment, then this facility. She looked around again, seeing it differently now. Not an abandoned research station. An active one, or at least one that had been active recently. And if Ghost had escaped from here 3 years ago, found its way to her ridge where she'd freed it from that snare. The snare hadn't been set by poachers. It had been set by the people running this facility, trying to recapture their escaped experiment. Nausea rolled through Emma's gut. She'd thought she was saving a wild animal. Instead, she'd been interfering with something much bigger, much more dangerous. The second passage led deeper into the mountain, but this time the walls weren't carved granite. They were natural cave formations, stalactites hanging like teeth in the ceiling, water dripping somewhere in the darkness. The warm air grew stronger, and with it came a smell that made Emma's stomach clench, decay, but wrong. Chemical sweet, like formaldehyde. She almost turned back. Almost. Then Ghost made a sound she'd never heard before, a low, keening cry that vibrated with pain, and Emma couldn't stop herself from following. The passage opened into another chamber, and this one stopped her heart. Cages, dozens of them, lining the walls from floor to ceiling. Most stood empty, their doors hanging open like broken jaws. But some, Emma's headlamp caught movement. In the back corner, behind bars, something shifted, not ghost-sized, smaller. A cub, maybe 4 months old, its fur matted and dull. It looked at her with eyes that held the same eerie intelligence as Ghost's, but also something else. Fear, pain, desperation. Oh, God, Emma breathed. Ghost padded to the cage and pressed its face against the bars. The cub mewed weakly, reaching one tiny paw through the gap. Emma's hands moved before her brain caught up, searching for a latch, a lock, anything. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The voice came from behind her, male and cold, and Emma spun around, her knife suddenly in her hand, though she didn't remember drawing it. A man stood at the chamber entrance, silhouetted by a stronger light source. Flashlight, Emma realized, not headlamp. He wore expedition gear, expensive stuff, and carried something that might have been a tranquilizer rifle. Step away from the cage, he said calmly. Both of you. Ghost growl filled the chamber, a sound that promised violence. The man raised his rifle. Subject 7, stand down. Ghost growl intensified, but the leopard took one step back, then another, as if some part of it still responded to commands, even 3 years after escaping. Emma's heart cracked watching it. Who are you? She demanded, keeping her knife visible. What is this place? The man's expression didn't change. Dr. Marcus Webb, and you're trespassing in a federal research facility. His eyes flicked to Ghost. You're also harboring stolen government property. Property? Emma's voice rose. That's a living creature. That a genetically modified predator worth approximately $20 million in research investment. Webb interrupted. Subject 7 was part of a climate adaptation study. When it escaped, we assumed it had died. Clearly, we were wrong. He gestured with a rifle toward the passage. Now! You're going to walk out of here quietly, forget everything you've seen, and never come back. If you cooperate, we'll pretend this encounter never happened. Emma looked at the cub in the cage, then at Ghost, then back at Webb. And if I don't? His smile never reached his eyes. Then Subject 7 becomes a threat to human life, and federal law requires us to neutralize it. Immediately, the word hung in the cold air. Neutralize, not capture, not contain. Kill. Emma's mind raced. She was one middle-aged woman with a knife against a man with a rifle. Ghost was powerful, but tranquilizer darts would drop it in seconds. And that cub, she needed time. Time to think, time to plan, time to find help. Okay, she said slowly, lowering her knife. I'll go. Webb nodded, satisfaction flickering across his face. Smart choice. Emma took one step toward the passage, then another. Ghost moved with her, staying between her and Webb. When they reached the chamber entrance, Emma glanced back one more time at the cub. Its eyes met hers, and in that moment, Emma made a promise she had no idea how to keep. I'll come back for you. Then she turned and walked into the darkness, Ghost padding beside her, and behind them, she heard Webb speaking into a radio. Security, this is Webb. We have a situation. Subject 7 has been located, and we have a civilian witness. The words faded as Emma climbed back to the tunnel, her mind churning. She'd stumbled into something massive, something that people with resources and authority wanted to keep hidden. And she was just one woman who'd spent 20 years hiding from the world, who barely had the strength to survive each winter, who had no connections, no money, no power. But she had Ghost, and Ghost had come back for a reason. When they emerged from the cliff face, the sun had fully risen, turning the snow into blinding white. Emma blinked against the glare and started toward her cabin, Ghost keeping pace. Her mind was already working through the problem like a puzzle. Who could she trust? The Forest Service might be in on it. Federal facility meant federal oversight. Local law enforcement wouldn't have jurisdiction. Environmental groups? Maybe. But how would she contact them without Webb knowing? She needed evidence. Photos, documentation. Something that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. And she needed to move fast. Webb knew where she lived now. He'd seen Ghost with her. They would come for both of them. And when they did, Emma pushed through her cabin door and immediately began gathering supplies. Her old camera, the one she'd used years ago for wildlife documentation. Extra batteries. Her late husband's hunting rifle, which she'd sworn never to touch again, but might need now. Warm clothes. Food. Ghost watched from the doorway, snow melting from its paws. We can't stay here, Emma told it, stuffing gear into her pack. They'll come looking. Tonight, maybe tomorrow. We need to disappear into the high country until I figure out what to do. Ghost's tail flicked once. Agreement? Understanding? Emma had stopped being surprised by how much the leopard seemed to comprehend. She was shouldering the pack when glass shattered in the kitchen window. Emma dove instinctively, hitting the floor as something metal clattered across the floorboards. Smoke began pouring from it. Tear gas, she realized with cold certainty. They weren't waiting for the night. They were here now. Ghost snarled and bolted back outside. Emma scrambled after it, eyes already streaming, lungs burning. She burst through the door and nearly collided with two figures in tactical gear, moving up the porch steps. Freeze, one shouted. Emma didn't freeze. She vaulted over the porch railing, landed hard in the snow, and ran. Emma's boots slammed into deep snow as she ran, each step sinking past her knees, slowing her down. Behind her, shouts echoed across the clearing. Ghost streaked ahead, moving with impossible grace across the surface, barely leaving prints. A sharp crack split the air. Not a gunshot, but something that whistled past Emma's ear and thudded into a pine trunk. Tranquilizer dart. They wanted Ghost alive. They wanted her silent. She veered left, following Ghost toward the tree line where the snow thinned under the canopy. Her lungs burned from the residual tear gas, each breath tasting of chemicals and fear. The pack on her back felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but she couldn't drop it. She needed those supplies, that camera, that evidence. Ghost glanced back, checking that she was following, then surged up a slope too steep for the men in their tactical gear to pursue quickly. Emma grabbed exposed roots and pulled herself up, boots scrabbling for purchase on ice-slicked rock. Another dart whistled past, embedding itself in snow inches from her hand. Subject 7, halt! A voice commanded through a megaphone, "You are federal property." Continued flight constitutes destruction of government assets. The absurdity of it would have made Emma laugh if she'd had breath to spare. They were threatening a leopard with legal consequences. She crested the ridge and didn't stop, following Ghost into a maze of granite outcroppings and twisted pines. The terrain here was brutal, places where avalanches had scoured the mountainside clean, leaving only bare stone and the skeletal remains of ancient trees. Emma knew this ground. She'd mapped every inch of it during her first years on the mountain, back when mapping things had mattered, back when she'd still believed in futures and plans. Ghost led her to a narrow crevice between two massive boulders, barely wide enough for Emma to squeeze through sideways. She wedged herself into the gap, pack scraping against stone, and Ghost followed, pressing close. The space opened into a small hollow, sheltered from wind and invisible from more than 10 feet away. Emma collapsed against the rock wall, chest heaving. Her hands shook violently, from cold, from adrenaline, from the reality of what had just happened. Her cabin, her home for 20 years, the only place she felt safe since losing her husband, was now compromised, occupied by people who saw Ghost as property and her as a problem to be eliminated. Ghost settled beside her, radiating warmth. Emma pressed her face against the leopard's thick fur and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of terror. Then she forced her mind to work. They would search the area. They had resources, radios, equipment, probably thermal imaging by nightfall. She and Ghost couldn't stay in one place. But she also couldn't run blind into the backcountry in December. The high peaks were death traps this time of year, and she didn't have enough supplies for an extended wilderness survival situation. She needed help. Real help. Emma pulled out her pack and inventoried what she'd grabbed. Camera, check. Extra batteries, check. Rifle with 6 rounds, check. 3 days of food if she rationed. Water purification tablets. Emergency blanket. Matches. Knife. Her husband's old satellite phone. Her heart jumped. The satellite phone. She kept it charged out of habit. Some stubborn refusal to let go of the last connection she had to the world beyond her ridge. She pulled it from the pack with trembling fingers and stared at the small screen. 1 bar of signal. Enough? Maybe. But who could she call? She'd spent 2 decades deliberately cutting herself off from everyone she'd known. Her sister thought she was crazy for staying in the mountains after Jacob died. Her old colleagues from the Wildlife Service had stopped trying to contact her years ago. She had no friends, no allies, no one who owed her anything. Except Emma's thumb hovered over the keypad. There was one person. Someone she hadn't spoken to in 15 years. Someone who'd understand what she'd found, who'd care about Ghost and that cub, who might have connections to do something about it. Dr. Sarah Chun, her old research partner from her days studying wildlife adaptation patterns. They'd worked together for a decade before Emma's life imploded. Sarah had sent letters for years after Jacob died, reaching out, offering support. Emma had never responded. Would Sarah even take her call? Only one way to find out. Emma dialed from memory, muscle memory from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The phone rang once, twice. On the 3rd ring, a woman's voice answered, professional and brisk. Chun. Emma's throat closed. She almost hung up. Hello? Who is this? Sarah. Emma forced out. It's Emma Frost. Silence. Long enough that Emma thought the call had dropped. Then, Emma? Sarah's voice transformed, shock and concern flooding through. Emma. My God, I thought, where are you? Are you okay? I need help, Emma said, and was horrified to hear her voice crack. I found something. In the mountains. A research facility that's... Sarah, they're doing genetic modification on snow leopards. Military program, I think, or government. I found one of their subjects, and now they're hunting us. And there's a cub still trapped there, and I don't know what to do. Slow down, Sarah interrupted gently. Genetic modification? Emma, are you sure? That would require... I'm looking at their subject right now, Emma said. Ghost's ear flicked at her tone. Enhance size, enhance intelligence, respiratory adaptations. And I found their facility. Full laboratory setup, inside a mountain cave. They have cages. Sarah, dozens of them. Another pause. Then Sarah's voice came back, harder. Do you have evidence? Photos, documentation? Not yet. They came for me before I could. Then get it, Sarah said. Emma, if what you're describing is real, this is massive. Illegal genetic experimentation, animal welfare violations, probably a dozen other federal crimes. But I can't do anything without proof. I need photos of the facility, the equipment, the animals, anything that proves this exists. Emma's stomach sank. I can't go back there. They know who I am now. They'll be watching. Then we find another way in, Sarah said. Listen to me. I have contacts at Fish and Wildlife, at Interior. People who will investigate if I bring them something solid. But they need evidence. Can you do this? Emma looked at Ghost. The leopard stared back with those uncanny eyes, and Emma thought of the cub, alone in that cage, waiting for someone to care enough to come back. Yes, she heard herself say. I can do it. Okay. Sarah's voice took on a planning tone, the same one she'd used when they were designing field studies together. First, you need to document everything from a safe distance. Use a telephoto lens if you have one. Second, find out who's funding this. There will be logos, paperwork, something that identifies the organization. Third, and Emma, this is crucial, stay alive. These people have already shown they're willing to use force. Don't take unnecessary risks. They called Ghost Subject 7, Emma said, which means there were at least 6 others, Sarah finished grimly. Jesus. Okay, I'm mobilizing resources on this end. Give me your coordinates, and I'll see about getting federal agents up there, but that could take days, maybe a week given the jurisdiction issues. Emma rattled off her GPS position. Sarah, thank you for believing me. Emma, we were friends for 10 years before everything fell apart. That doesn't just disappear. Sarah's voice softened. When this is over, we're going to talk. Really talk. About Jacob, about why you vanished, about everything. But right now, just promise me you'll be careful. I promise. Emma ended the call and sat in the cold silence. Ghost warmth the only thing keeping her from shaking apart. She had an ally now. A plan. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had an hour ago. Now she just had to survive long enough to execute it. Emma waited until dusk before moving. The temperature had dropped to 20 below, cold enough that the searchers would have retreated to heated vehicles or given up for the night. She and Ghost emerged from the hollow and began working their way east, parallel to the ridge but below the sight line from her cabin. The camera hung around her neck, bumping against her chest with each step. She dug through her pack and found her old telephoto lens, a relic from her wildlife photography days. It would have to be enough. Ghost moved like a phantom through the deepening shadows, occasionally stopping to scent the air. Once, the leopard froze completely, ears swiveling toward a sound Emma couldn't hear. They waited, pressed against a snowbank, until Ghost relaxed and moved on. They were being hunted, Emma realized. Not just pursued. Hunted. By people who knew these mountains almost as well as she did, who had technology and numbers on their side. But Emma had something they didn't. She had 20 years of survival instinct honed by grief and isolation. She knew where the ice was thin and where a hold. She knew which slopes avalanched and which were stable. She knew this mountain the way Ghost knew how to kill, instinctively, with a precision born from necessity. And she was done running. They reached the cliff face from above, approaching from the ridgetop, where a narrow goat path clung to the rock. Emma lay flat on her stomach in the snow, camera ready, and looked down at the hidden entrance. 3 vehicles sat in the clearing below, SUVs with government plates. Portable lights had been set up, generators humming. She counted 6 people moving around the site, all in tactical gear. They'd widened the entrance, removing the carefully placed stones to reveal a larger opening. Equipment was being carried inside. Computers, what looked like medical gear, security systems. They weren't just recapturing Ghost. They were re-establishing the facility. Emma's finger found the shutter button. She began photographing everything. The vehicles and their plates. The faces of the personnel. The equipment. The logo on one woman's jacket. A stylized double helix inside a mountain silhouette, with text too small to read but unmistakably corporate. Ghost crept forward until its head was level with Emma's, watching the activity below with an intensity that raised a hair on Emma's neck. The Leopard's muscles trembled with barely contained violence. "Not yet," Emma whispered. "We need more." She zoomed in on the papers one man was studying, diagrams of the cave system, she realized. But not just the chambers she'd seen. These maps showed an extensive network, multiple levels descending deep into the mountain. Whatever this facility was, she'd only seen a fraction of it. A woman emerged from the cave entrance, and Emma's blood went cold. Dr. Marcus Webb walked beside her, deep in conversation. The woman was older, maybe 60, with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore civilian clothes, but moved with military precision. Emma photographed them both, getting clear shots of their faces. "Accelerated timeline," the woman was saying, her voice just barely carrying up to Emma's position. "Senator wants results before the committee hearing in March. Can you deliver?" "If we recover Subject 7, yes," Webb replied. "The genetic sequences we refined in that specimen are the key to everything. Without it, we're back to square one." "Then find it. Use whatever resources necessary. The defense applications alone are worth billions." Dr. Webb. "Soldiers who can operate at high altitude without oxygen degradation, who can withstand extreme cold. This could change modern warfare." Emma's finger froze on the shutter button. Defense applications. They weren't just studying climate adaptation. They were weaponizing it. Ghost's growl was so low Emma felt it more than heard it. A vibration through the frozen ground. The woman's head snapped up, scanning the ridge. "Did you hear that?" Emma didn't breathe, didn't move. Ghost had gone perfectly still beside her. Webb pulled a radio from his belt. "All units. Possible contact on the North Ridge. Thermal imaging now." "Shit." Emma carefully backed away from the edge, Ghost moving with her. They had maybe 2 minutes before thermal cameras picked up their heat signatures against the cold rock. She scrambled to her feet and ran, staying low, following the goat path back toward the tree line. Ghost bounded ahead, finding paths Emma's eyes couldn't see in the failing light. Behind them, shouts erupted. There, north side, 2 heat signatures. 1 human, 1 large animal. "It's Subject 7. Get the drones airborne." Emma burst into trees just as a high-pitched whine filled the air. She glanced back and saw lights lifting from the clearing. Drones, 3 of them, equipped with searchlights and cameras. They spread out in a search pattern, methodically scanning the mountainside. Ghost led her down a steep embankment to where a frozen stream cut through the rocks. The Leopard bounded onto the ice, and Emma followed, praying it would hold. Her boot slipped, and she went down hard, pain shooting through her hip. Ghost circled back, pressed against her side, and Emma hauled herself upright. The ice groaned beneath their combined weight, but held. They followed the stream for half a mile, the frozen surface masking their heat signature from the drones overhead. Emma's lungs screamed. Her body pushed beyond what it should be capable of, but she kept moving 1 foot in front of the other, because stopping meant capture. Finally, Ghost veered off the ice toward a dense stand of pines. Emma followed and found herself at the entrance to a game trail, barely visible in the darkness. They pushed into the undergrowth, branches clawing at Emma's face and clothes, until the trail opened into a small hollow protected by a fallen pine. Emma collapsed, her body shaking violently. Ghost settled beside her, licking ice crystals from its paws. Above them, the whine of drones faded into the distance. She'd gotten the photos, evidence of the facility, the personnel, the corporate involvement. It should be enough for Sarah to take to the authorities. But Emma kept seeing that woman's face, hearing her words. Defense applications. Worth billions. This wasn't just some rogue scientist doing illegal experiments. This was funded, organized, backed by people with serious money and political connections. People who wouldn't let one woman and a modified Leopard destroy years of work and billions in potential profit. People who would kill to protect their secret. Emma pulled out the satellite phone with numb fingers and started composing a message to Sarah, attaching the photos. The upload bar crept forward with agonizing slowness. 1%, 2%, 3%. A sound made her look up. Not the drones. Something else. Closer. Ghost's ears pinned flat against its skull. Footsteps. Crunching through snow. Multiple sets. The upload bar read 15%. Emma forced herself to stay still, to let it finish. 20%. 25%. Thermal shows something in that hollow. A male voice said, "Close. Too close. Could be an elk, but..." "Check it anyway." Another voice ordered, "If it's Subject 7, I want tranks ready. If it's the woman, we bring her in for questioning." 50%. Emma's heart hammered, so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. 75%. A beam of light swept across the fallen pine, probing the shadows. 90%. Ghost tensed, muscles coiling. 95%. The light found them. 100%. Upload complete. "There!" someone shouted. Ghost exploded from the hollow, in a blur of pale fur and rage. Emma heard screams, the crack of a tranquilizer gun misfiring, curses. She scrambled out the opposite side and ran, not looking back, trusting Ghost to follow. Behind her, chaos erupted. Men shouting. Something heavy hitting the ground, the distinctive snarl of a predator defending itself. Emma's boots found a deer trail, and she followed it blindly, branches whipping her face. A minute later, Ghost materialized beside her, moving easily despite the darkness. The leopard had blood on its muzzle. Emma didn't ask whose. They ran until Emma's legs gave out, and she crashed into the snow, unable to go another step. Ghost stood guard over her, ears swiveling, scanning for threats. But this time, no pursuit followed. Emma lay gasping in the frozen darkness, staring up at stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. The photos were uploaded. Sarah had them. The evidence existed now, beyond Webb's reach, beyond his ability to suppress. It was something, a start. But Emma thought of that cub, alone in its cage, and knew she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. They made it to an abandoned ranger station just before dawn, Emma stumbling with exhaustion, Ghost limping slightly from a wound Emma hadn't noticed in the darkness. The station was little more than a shack, but it had 4 walls and a roof that mostly didn't leak. Emma collapsed onto a dusty cot, while Ghost curled up near the door, keeping watch. She knew she should tend to the leopard's wound, should eat something, should plan their next move. Instead, she closed her eyes for just a moment, and sleep dragged her under like a riptide. She woke to sunlight streaming through grimy windows, and Ghost's warm weight pressed against her legs. The satellite phone was buzzing. Emma fumbled for it, saw Sarah's name on the screen. "Hello." "Emma, I got the photos." Sarah's voice was tight. "This is bigger than I thought. The logo you captured belongs to Apex Biotech. They're a defense contractor with deep Pentagon connections. And the woman in the photos is Dr. Catherine Marsh. She's former Army, ran classified programs before going private sector. Emma, these people don't play games." "I noticed," Emma said dryly, touching the bruises on her ribs. "I've sent everything to a contact at Fish and Wildlife, but they're moving carefully. Apex's lawyers, political connections. Without more evidence." "There's a cub," Emma interrupted, "still in the facility. Maybe others. I saw dozens of empty cages." Silence. Then, "Emma, you can't go back there." "I have to. That cub will be rescued by federal agents when they raid the facility," which they will do, Emma. "But it takes time. Legal warrants, jurisdictional issues, building a solid case." "That cub doesn't have time," Emma said flatly. I saw how they keep them. Alone in the dark. Probably drugged to keep them docile. Ghost came back for a reason, Sarah. It led me there because it needed help. I'm not going to abandon. You're emotionally compromised, Sarah said, not unkindly. You've bonded with this animal and you're projecting. I'm not projecting. Emma looked at Ghost, who watched her with those intelligent eyes. I'm responding to a living being in distress. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible mountain stories like this one. Sarah sighed. Emma, I know you. I know what you're going to do no matter what I say. So at least let me help. I'm flying out tonight. Should arrive in Denver tomorrow morning. I'll rent a car and head your way. Don't do anything stupid before I get there. Define stupid. Don't go back into that facility alone. Emma thought about that cub, about the promise she'd made. I'll try. Emma, I said I'll try. That's the best I can offer. After they hung up, Emma sat in the dusty station and took stock. She had some food left, enough for maybe 2 more days. Ammunition for the rifle, the camera with its damning photos already uploaded, and Ghost, wounded but alive, watching her with an expectation she couldn't quite interpret. What do you want to do? Emma asked the Leopard. I'm not some action hero. I'm a 52-year-old woman who's been hiding from life for 20 years. I don't know how to fight people like this. Ghost rose and padded to the door, looking back over its shoulder. The message was clear. Emma laughed bitterly. You wanted to follow you. Again. Into danger. Again. She stood, joints protesting. You know, most people get cats that just knock things off tables and demand food. But no, I get the genetically modified super leopard who keeps leading me into federal crimes. Ghost's tail flicked, almost like amusement. Emma checked the rifle, slung it over her shoulder, and followed the leopard out into the morning light. The sun was bright, the sky painfully blue. A beautiful day. The kind of day that made Emma remember why she'd stayed in these mountains even after everything fell apart. Ghost led her north, away from the facility, climbing higher into terrain Emma rarely visited. The air thinned, her breath coming harder. They passed through ancient pine forests and across snowfields that would kill anyone who fell through into the hidden crevasses beneath. 2 hours later, they crested a ridge, and Emma saw where Ghost was taking her. Another entrance, hidden even better than the first, barely visible as a dark slit in the rock face. But the tracks in the snow told the story. Human footprints, recent, leading in and out. A back door. Of course they'd have a back door. Emma approached cautiously, Ghost pressing close to her side. The entrance was just wide enough for one person to squeeze through sideways. Beyond it, she could hear the faint hum of generators, smell the antiseptic bite of laboratory chemicals. She was at the top of the facility. If she went in here, she'd be descending into their stronghold, surrounded by their people, with no easy escape route. It was possibly the stupidest thing she could do. Emma thought of Sarah's warning, thought of her own survival instincts screaming at her to retreat, thought of 20 years spent choosing safety over everything else, until safety had become its own kind of prison. Then she thought of that cub's eyes, watching her leave, believing she'd come back. Well, Emma muttered to Ghost, at least die heroically is better than freezing to death alone in a cabin. More dramatic. Ghost's expression, if a leopard could be said to have expressions, suggested it was questioning her sanity. Emma couldn't blame it. She checked the rifle one more time, took a deep breath of clean mountain air, and slipped into the darkness. The passage descended in a tight spiral, carved from living rock. Emma moved slowly, one hand on the wall to steady herself, the rifle slung across her back. Ghost moved ahead of her, a pale shape in the beam of her headlamp, ears swiveling at every sound. The generator hum grew louder as they descended, then voices muffled, indistinct, but definitely human. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She was really doing this, breaking into a facility run by people with guns and legal immunity, with no backup except a leopard that technically belonged to them. The spiral opened into a natural cave chamber that had been modified with metal walkways and safety railings. Emma clicked off her headlamp and let her eyes adjust to the dim emergency lighting that lined the walls. Below, she could see the main facility, the laboratory chamber she discovered before, but now lit and occupied, for people worked at computer stations. Another two stood near the cage area, talking in low voices. No sign of Dr. Marsh or Webb, but their absence somehow made Emma more nervous, not less. Ghost crept to the edge of the walkway and peered down, body tense. Emma knelt beside the leopard and followed its gaze. The cub's cage sat exactly where she'd seen it before, but now she could see the animal more clearly in the light. It was worse than she'd thought. The cub wasn't just scared, it was sick. Its breathing was labored, its movement sluggish. Whatever they were doing to it, it wasn't working. Emma's jaw clenched. She needed to get down there, but 6 people stood between her and that cage. Even with Ghost's help, those weren't odds she could win. She scanned the chamber, looking for options. There, an old ventilation shaft, partially concealed behind equipment. It looked just wide enough for her to crawl through. Ghost couldn't follow that route, which meant they'd have to split up. Emma didn't like it, but she didn't see another choice. She pressed her forehead to Ghost, a gesture the leopard had allowed during those 6 weeks of recovery 3 years ago. "I need you to create a distraction," Emma whispered. "Nothing violent. Just make them look the other way." Ghost's eyes held hers for a long moment. Then the leopard turned and padded back up the spiral passage, disappearing into darkness. Emma waited, nerves stretched taut. She counted her heartbeats, 50, 60, 70. A roar echoed through the cave system, primal and terrifying, coming from somewhere above the main entrance. Not Ghost's normal vocalization. This was deliberately amplified, bouncing off the rocks to sound like it came from multiple directions. The effect was immediate. All 6 people in the chamber below jerked to attention. "What the hell was that?" one man demanded. "Subject 7, a woman replied, already moving toward the entrance. "It's back. Alert security now." 4 of them rushed toward the main entrance, pulling radios and weapons. The 2 remaining stayed near the computers, but their attention was fixed on the entrance, not on the facility behind them. Emma moved. She slipped down a service ladder to a lower walkway, then dropped to the chamber floor behind a stack of equipment crates. Her boots made almost no sound on the stone. She crept toward the ventilation shaft, staying low, keeping equipment between herself and the distracted technicians. The shaft's cover had been removed at some point and never replaced. Emma squeezed inside, pulling herself forward on her elbows. The metal was cold enough to burn through her clothes, and the space was so tight her shoulders scraped both sides. 20 feet. That's all she needed to crawl. 20 feet to reach the cage area from behind. Halfway through, she heard voices directly below her. Accelerating the degradation, a male voice was saying, "Subject 12 isn't responding to the treatments. We're going to lose it." "Marsh won't accept that," a woman replied. She specifically said 12 showed the most promise for the temperature regulation protocols. Showing promise and surviving the modification process are 2 different things. We pushed too hard, tried to incorporate too many changes at once. The genetic instability is a problem for Dr. Webb to solve. Our job is to keep it alive until he does. Emma's stomach turned. They were talking about the cub like it was a failed product, not a living creature suffering because of their experiments. She reached the end of the shaft and found herself looking down into a storage area behind the cages. No one in sight. Emma lowered herself carefully, wincing at the soft thud her boots made on the stone. She froze, listening. The voices continued their conversation, undisturbed. She crept forward between stacks of supplies until she could see the cage. The cub lay on its side, ribs showing through thin fur, eyes half closed. And 4 line ran from its foreleg to a bag of clear fluid hanging on the cage bars. Emma's throat tightened. This wasn't research. This was torture. She approached the cage, fingers searching for a lock mechanism. The cub's eyes opened slightly, tracked her movement. Recognition flickered in those 2 intelligent eyes, followed by something that looked like hope. "I've got you," Emma whispered. "I'm getting you out." The lock was electronic, requiring a key card she didn't have. Emma pulled out her knife and began working on the hinges instead, Old-fashioned mechanical ones that could be forced if she could just get the pins loose. What the hell are you doing? Emma spun. One of the technicians stood 10 feet away, a young woman in her 20s, staring at Emma with a mix of shock and confusion. Emma straightened slowly, keeping her hands visible. I'm taking this animal out of here. You're the woman from yesterday. The trespasser. The technician's hand moved toward her radio. Don't, Emma said quietly. Please, just let me take it and go. You've seen how it's suffering. Whatever you're doing, it isn't working. The woman's hand hesitated. Subject 12 is part of a critical research program. I can't just... Its name isn't Subject 12. It's a living creature, and it's dying because of what you're doing to it. We're trying to save it. The woman's voice rose defensively. The modifications cause genetic instability, yes, but we're developing treatments. In another few weeks. It doesn't have a few weeks. Emma gestured to the cub. Look at it. Really look. If you had any conscience, you'd end its suffering, not prolong it. The technician's face crumpled. I didn't. When I took this job, they said we were developing climate adaptation technologies. Medical applications. They didn't tell me about... She gestured helplessly at the cages. There were 11 others before this one. All dead. And we just kept going, kept trying, because Marsh said the defense contract required. She stopped abruptly, seeming to realize she was confessing to a stranger. Emma took a careful step forward. Help me, she said softly. You know this is wrong. Help me get out, and I promise I'll make sure the world knows what's happening here, that you tried to stop it. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Her hand moved, not to her radio, but to her pocket. She pulled out a key card. Take it, she whispered. Take Subject 12 and go. The emergency exit is through that passage. She pointed to a tunnel mouth Emma hadn't noticed. It leads to the North Ridge. You'll have maybe 10 minutes before they realize. An alarm shrieked through the facility. The woman's face went white. That's not me, I didn't... Someone else must have found the open shaft, Emma said. She grabbed the key card and swiped it across the lock. The cage door clicked open. The cub tried to stand and collapsed. Emma carefully disconnected the 4-line, then scooped the tiny leopard into her arms. It weighed almost nothing, all bones and matted fur. Its heart fluttered against her chest like a trapped bird. Go, the technician urged. Now! Emma ran for the emergency exit. The cub clutched against her chest. Behind her, shouts erupted as security personnel poured into the chamber. The technician was yelling something about an intruder, buying Emma precious seconds. The passage was narrow and dark, barely lit by emergency strips. Emma ran anyway, trusting her feet to find the ground, one hand steadying the cub. Its breathing was rapid and shallow against her collarbone. Stay with me, Emma whispered. Just stay with me. The passage climbed steeply, her legs burning with effort. She could hear pursuit behind her, boots on stone, angry voices, the metallic sound of weapons being readied. They were close, too close. The passage opened onto a ledge high on the mountainside. Morning sun stabbed Emma's eyes, blinding after the cave darkness. She stumbled forward, disoriented, and nearly ran straight off a cliff. She caught herself at the last second, boots skidding on ice at the ledge's edge. Below, the mountain fell away in a sheer drop of at least 200 feet. Behind her, footsteps pounded closer. Emma spun, looking for an escape route. The ledge was maybe 20 feet wide, ending at cliff faces on both sides. The only way off was a passage she just exited, which was now blocked by 3 armed security personnel, emerging into the sunlight. She was trapped. The lead guard raised his weapon, a rifle, not a tranquilizer gun. They weren't trying to capture her anymore. Set down the specimen and step away from the edge. Emma held the cub tighter. Its heartbeat was slowing. She could feel it die in her arms. No, she said. Ma'am, I will shoot you. Set it down. Now. Emma's mind raced. She couldn't fight 3 armed men. Couldn't run. Couldn't protect herself and the cub. This was it. The end of her stupid, heroic attempt to save something that probably couldn't be saved anyway. She looked down at the cub. Its eyes were closed. its breathing barely perceptible. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "I tried. I really—" A roar split the air, and Ghost exploded on a ledge from above. The leopard must have climbed the cliff face. Something Emma would have said was impossible for an animal that size. But Ghost landed behind the security personnel with a force that shook the stone, all grace and coil violence. The guard spun, weapon swinging toward this new threat. Ghost snarled, a sound that promised death, and the men's training wavered against primal fear. In that moment of hesitation, Emma saw her chance. She ran, not toward the passage, but along the ledge where a narrow goat path cut across the cliff face. It was suicidal, barely 6 inches wide in places, crumbling in others. But it was a path, and it led down. "Stop her," someone shouted. A gunshot cracked. Rock exploded inches from Emma's head, chips stinging her face. She didn't stop, couldn't stop. She edged onto the path, the cub cradled in one arm, her other hand gripping the cliff face. Behind her, Ghost's roars mixed with human screams. She didn't look back, couldn't afford to. The path required total focus. One wrong step and she'd fall. Taking the cub with her, the path descended in a terrifying series of switchbacks, each turn exposing her to the drop below. Emma's legs shook, her injured hips screaming with every step. The cub's weight seemed to increase with each foot of descent, dragging at her tired arms. Halfway down, she heard scrabbling above her. Ghost, following, moving with impossible agility across the narrow path. The leopard caught up and pressed close, as if trying to steady Emma with its presence. Almost there, Emma gasped, more to herself and the animals. Almost. Her boot hit a patch of ice. Her legs went out from under her. Emma fell, scrabbling desperately for a handhold, and slid toward the edge. Her fingers caught an exposed root, and she jerked to a stop, pain screaming through her shoulder. The cub slipped from her arm. Ghost moved with blinding speed, catching the tiny leopard by the scruff before to fall. The leopard carefully placed the cub on a wider section of the path, then turned back to Emma. Emma pulled herself up with shaking arms, every muscle protesting. When she finally stood on solid ground again, her legs nearly gave out. Above, the guards appeared at the top of the path, but they didn't follow. Too dangerous. Instead, one lifted a radio. "Subject 7 and the intruder are heading north on the cliff path," he reported. "Advise helicopter intercept at the base." Helicopter. Of course they had a helicopter. Emma forced herself to keep moving. The path finally opened onto a boulder field at the mountain's base. She scooped up the cub, still breathing, still alive, and ran into the forest with Ghost at her side. The helicopter's thump-thump-thump grew louder, but the tree canopy was thick here, hiding them. Emma navigated by instinct, heading roughly northeast toward where she'd agreed to meet Sarah. Behind her, men's voices called out coordinates. Dogs barked. They brought tracking dogs. Emma's mind cataloged the threats with a strange clarity. Helicopter, dogs, armed personnel, against one exhausted woman, one wounded leopard, and one dying cub. The odds hadn't improved. But Emma didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because stopping meant the cub died in a cage, meant Ghost got recaptured, meant everything she'd fought for over the last 2 days meant nothing. She crashed through underbrush, branches clawing at her clothes. The cub's breathing grew more labored. Ghost limped badly now, the wound from yesterday clearly worse than Emma had realized. They were all falling apart. The trees thinned ahead, opening onto a road, the old Forest Service road that wound through these mountains. And parked on that road, engine running, was a silver rental SUV. Sarah Chin stood beside it, waving frantically. Emma nearly sobbed with relief. She burst from a tree line, Ghost bounding beside her, and Sarah threw open the back door. "Get in, now!" Emma dove into the back seat, Ghost leaping in after her. Sarah slammed the door and gunned the engine before Emma could even catch her breath. "Are you insane?" Sarah demanded, eyes on the rear-view mirror. "I said don't do anything stupid, and you, is that a leopard cub?" Subject 12. Emma gasped. "It's dying. We need a vet." Sarah. "Now." "A vet?" Emma. "That's a genetically modified. It's a baby." Emma's voice broke. It's suffering because of what they did to it, and I'm not letting it die. Please. Sarah's jaw clenched. Then she grabbed her phone, dialing one-handed while taking a turn too fast. Dr. Martinez? It's Sarah-chan. I need a favor. A big one. And I need you to not ask questions. Behind them, the helicopter appeared over the treetops. Sarah swore and accelerated, the SUV fishtailing on the narrow road. They're really not giving up, are they? Defense contracts worth billions, Emma quoted grimly. They can't afford to. The helicopter swooped lower, keeping pace. A loudspeaker crackled to life. Pull over immediately. You are harboring stolen federal property. Pull over or we will disable your vehicle. Federal property? Sarah's voice rose. They're seriously claiming. The helicopter moved ahead of them, descending until it blocked the road. Sarah slammed on the brakes, the SUV sliding to a stop. For a moment, everyone sat in stunned silence. Then the helicopter's side door opened, and Dr. Catherine Marsh leaned out, her steel-gray hair barely moving in the rotor wash. Dr. Chun, Marsh's voice came to the loudspeaker, calm and reasonable. We've been trying to reach you. I understand Ms. Frost has made some concerning claims about our research facility. Sarah rolled down her window. Your research facility is conducting illegal genetic experimentation on endangered species. Our facility is operating under classified federal permits, Marsh replied. I'd be happy to explain our work to you in a secure location. But first, I need you to return our property. Her eyes fixed on Ghost. Subject 7 represents decades of research and significant taxpayer investment. Surely you understand. It's not property, Emma interrupted, leaning forward. None of them are. They're living creatures capable of suffering, and you're torturing them for profit. Marsh's expression hardened. You don't understand the bigger picture. The climate crisis threatens national security. Soldiers who can operate in extreme conditions, rescue workers who can survive high altitudes, entire populations adapted to withstand. You're playing God, Sarah cut in, and you're doing it without oversight, without ethics review, without any consideration for the welfare of your subjects. I'm solving problems, Marsh said coldly. While people like you write papers and wring your hands, I'm actually doing something. In 10 years, when coastal cities are underwater and food shortages trigger wars, you'll thank me for this work. In 10 years, Emma said quietly, you'll be in prison for what you've done. Marsh's smile was predatory. Bold words from a woman who's currently trapped on a dead-end road, surrounded by my security personnel, with stolen property in her vehicle. She gestured, and Emma saw SUVs pulling up behind them, blocking any escape. They were boxed in. Completely. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Emma, what do we do? Emma looked down at the cub, barely clinging to life. At Ghost, wounded and exhausted. At Sarah, who dropped everything to help a friend she hadn't spoken to in 15 years. She'd tried. She'd fought. She'd gotten evidence out to the world. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. We give up, Emma said softly. What? Sarah and Ghost both looked at her, one with shock, one with what might have been betrayal. Emma met Marsh's eyes through the windshield. We surrender, but I have conditions. Marsh's eyebrow rose. You're not in a position to negotiate. Yes, I am, because in about 30 seconds, those photos I uploaded are going to hit every major news network simultaneously. Emma held up her phone, showing a scheduled email with attachments. I set it up while we were driving. Cancel button right here. All I have to do is press it, and your illegal program stays secret for maybe another day or two. Or I let the timer run out, and by noon, the entire world knows what Apex Biotech has been doing in these mountains. Marsh's face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? Emma's thumb hovered over the phone. 15 seconds. Emma, Sarah started. Trust me, Emma whispered. Then louder, here's the deal, Dr. Marsh. You let us take the cub to a real veterinarian. You release all records on every subject you've ever created. What happened to them, where they are, all of it. And you shut down this facility permanently. That's insane. I can't. 10 seconds. And I want immunity for everyone involved in helping me. Sarah, that technician who let me into the cage, everyone. Marsh's jaw clenched. You're asking me to destroy years of work. I'm asking you to stop torturing animals for profit. 5 seconds. Emma's thumb moved toward the button. Wait. Marsh's composure cracked. Wait. God damn it. Fine. We'll negotiate. Put the phone down. Emma didn't move her thumb. Not until I have it in writing. Legal immunity, veterinary care, facility closure. And Ghost stays with me. Subject 7 is worth $20 million in research investment. I know. Consider it the price of keeping your freedom. Because Dr. Marsh, if those photos go public, the federal investigation won't stop with your facility. They'll look into Apex Biotech, your defense contracts, everyone who authorized funding. How many senators do you think will go down with you? The silence stretched out, broken only by the helicopter's rotors. Finally, Marsh spoke into her radio. Stand down. All units, stand down. She turned back to Emma. You'll have your terms. But this conversation isn't over. Yes, Emma said quietly. It is. She pressed cancel on the email. The scheduled send disappeared. Marsh's eyes widened. You actually would have... In a heartbeat, Emma confirmed. Now get your helicopter out of our way. 3 hours later, Emma sat in a veterinary clinic in Boulder, watching Dr. Martinez work on the cub. Sarah stood beside her, arms crossed, looking both impressed and furious. That was the stupidest, most reckless thing I've ever seen, Sarah said. You could have gotten us all killed. But I didn't. You're infuriating. I know. Sarah's expression softened slightly. What you did, getting that evidence, standing up to Marsh. Emma, you saved dozens of animals. Maybe hundreds, if this program was as extensive as she claimed. I just saved one, Emma said, watching the cub's chest rise and fall with steadier breaths. The rest is bureaucracy and lawyers. Ghost lay beside Emma's chair, finally allowing the veterinary assistant to clean and bandage its wound. The leopard's eyes never left the cub. Dr. Martinez straightened, pulling off his gloves. It's stable, malnourished, dehydrated, with significant genetic abnormalities that will require ongoing monitoring. But it should survive. Emma's eyes burned with tears. She didn't try to hide. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm breaking about 15 laws right now. Martinez smiled slightly. But Sarah said you were the friend who taught her everything she knows about caring for wildlife. That's good enough for me. After he left, Sarah sat down beside Emma. So, we have a genetically modified snow leopard cub that legally doesn't exist, and its enormous genetically modified parent who also legally doesn't exist. What's your plan? Emma looked at Ghost. The leopard looked back with those two intelligent eyes. Honestly, I have no idea, but I'll figure it out. She paused. Actually, we'll figure out, if you want to help. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You disappeared for 15 years, Emma. After Jacob died, you just vanished into those mountains. I tried to reach you. I tried so hard. I know. I'm sorry. Why now? Why let me back in now? Emma considered the question. Because I remembered that hiding isn't the same as healing. And because... She gestured to Ghost and the cub. Sometimes you need help carrying things that are too heavy for one person. Sarah's eyes glistened. That's the first honest thing you've said to me since Jacob's funeral. I know. I'm working on it. They sat in companionable silence, watching the cub sleep. Ghost eventually patted over and pressed its massive head against Emma's knee. So, Sarah said eventually, what happens next? Emma thought about her cabin, probably sees as evidence now. Thought about the mountains that had been both her prison and her refuge. Thought about the long road of paperwork and legal battles ahead. We testify, Emma said. We make sure Marsh and everyone involved face consequences. We find homes for any other subjects still alive. And she hesitated. We figure out how to live with what they created. Ghost and this cub, they didn't ask to be modified. They deserve safety, not labs or cages. That's a long-term commitment. I'm aware. Sarah smiled. Good, because you're going to need a research partner to study their behavior, document their needs, fight for legal protections. Someone with credentials and connections. She held out her hand. What do you say? Partners again. Emma took her hand. Partners. Outside, the sun was setting behind the Rockies, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. Emma walked to the window and watched the light fade, Ghost at her side. 20 years ago, she fled into those mountains to hide from pain. Today, she'd come out of them to fight for something that mattered. It wasn't healing, not completely. The grief of losing Jacob would never fully disappear. But for the first time in 2 decades, Emma felt something other than emptiness when she looked at the world. She felt purpose. 6 months later, Emma stood on a ridge overlooking what used to be Apex Biotech's research facility. Federal agents had stripped it bare weeks ago, carrying out equipment and records that would be used in the trial. Dr. Marsh was facing a dozen charges. Dr. Webb had turned state's evidence. And Apex Biotech was being investigated by 3 different agencies. The technician who'd helped Emma, her name was Lisa, had been granted immunity in exchange for testimony. She'd sent Emma a letter thanking her for giving her the courage to do the right thing. Ghost stood beside Emma on the ridge, looking healthier than she'd ever seen the Leopard. The wound had healed completely, and proper nutrition had filled out the too lean frame. The cub, Emma had finally let herself name Hope, was thriving at the sanctuary Sarah had helped establish on Emma's property. Well, her new property. The government had compensated her for the cabin they'd essentially destroyed, and with that money and Sarah's help, Emma had purchased a larger piece of land perfect for housing animals that couldn't be released into the wild. For other subjects had been recovered from satellite facilities. All were being rehabilitated. All would eventually come to Emma's sanctuary. You ready? Sarah called from below, where the car was parked. Almost, Emma called back. She knelt beside Ghost, pressing her forehead the Leopard's one last time. Thank you, she whispered, for coming back, for reminding me that some things are worth fighting for. Ghost's purr rumbled through its chest. Then the Leopard turned and bounded down the ridge, disappearing into the forest with the speed and grace of a wild thing. Emma watched it go, her throat tight. Ghost had chosen freedom, as was its right. But Emma knew the Leopard would return. They were bonded now, connected by trauma and survival, and the strange alchemy that transforms rescuer and rescued into something neither expected. Family. Emma walked down to the car, where Sarah waited with Hope curled up asleep in the back seat. Ghost, Sarah asked quietly. Gone. For now. Emma smiled despite the ache in her chest. But I'll see it again. Ghost always comes back. They drove away from the facility, toward the sanctuary, toward the work that would fill Emma's days for years to come. The mountains rose around them, ancient and indifferent, holding their secrets close. But Emma had learned something in these past months. Mountains might keep secrets, but they also revealed them to those brave enough to look, to those willing to fight for what they found, to those who understood that hiding from the world only worked until the world came knocking. And when it did, you had a choice. You could run. You could hide. You could let the world take what it wanted. Or you could stand up and say, no, not today. Not on my mountain. Emma looked at Sarah, at Hope, at the road ahead leading to a future she hadn't dared imagine 6 months ago. Let's go home, she said. And for the first time in 20 years, home didn't feel like a place to hide. It felt like a place to live. The first snow of November fell softly across the sanctuary, dusting the pines and covering the ground in a blanket of white that sparkled under the morning sun. Emma stood on the porch of her new cabin, larger than the old one, built with funds from the settlement and designed specifically to accommodate the work she and Sarah were doing, and watched Hope play in the clearing below. The cub wasn't a cub anymore. At 18 months old, Hope had grown into a stunning young leopard, though still smaller than Ghost. The genetic modifications that had nearly killed her as an infant had stabilized under Dr. Martinez's careful monitoring, leaving her with enhanced cold resistance and unusual intelligence, but also with limitations. Hope would never survive truly wild conditions. Her respiratory system, while improved from those first desperate days, remained compromised. She needed supplemental care, monitoring, a controlled environment. She needed the sanctuary. Emma sipped her coffee and smiled as Hope pounced on a snowdrift, sending powder flying. Behind the main cabin, the rehabilitation enclosure stretched across 10 acres. Spacious habitats designed for 4 other subjects they recovered. 2 had been successfully released into protected wilderness areas after months of rehabilitation. The remaining 2, like Hope, would live out their lives here, safe and cared for. She's gotten so big. Sarah's voice came from behind Emma, her research partner and friend, truly friend again after all the lost years, stepped onto the porch with her own mug of tea. Hard to believe that's the same half-dead cub you carried out of that facility. Hard to believe any of this, Emma admitted. She gestured to the sanctuary, the cabin, the life she'd somehow built from the wreckage of the past year. A year ago, I was barely surviving in that old cabin, spending my days chopping wood and trying not to think too much. Now look at us. Now you're running a federally recognized wildlife sanctuary, consulting with 3 different universities on genetic modification ethics, and testifying before Congress next month. Sarah's smile was warm. You've come a long way, Emma Frost. Emma laughed softly. I still can't believe they want me to testify. I'm not a scientist, not a legal expert. I'm just someone who found something wrong and couldn't walk away. That's exactly why they want you, Sarah said. Because you're real. You're the human face of what Apex Biotech did. When you tell your story, ghosts leading you to that facility, that dying cub, everything you risk to expose the truth, people listen. Emma's throat tightened. The trial had concluded 3 months ago. Dr. Catherine Marsh was serving 15 years for illegal experimentation, animal cruelty, and fraud. Dr. Webb had received a lighter sentence in exchange for his cooperation, but his scientific career was over. Apex Biotech had dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay settlements to environmental groups and animal welfare organizations. And Lisa, the technician who'd helped Emma that day, had come to work at the sanctuary. She was down in the medical building right now, conducting the morning health checks with Dr. Martinez. Justice had been served, as much as justice ever was in cases like this. But Emma still thought about the subjects they hadn't found. The 11 others who died before Hope, the ones buried in unmarked graves behind the facility, their lives reduced to failure reports in laboratory notebooks. You're thinking about them again, Sarah said quietly, reading Emma's expression with the ease of old friendship restored. Always, Emma admitted. I saved one, and I can't stop thinking about the ones I didn't. That's because you care. It's what makes you good at this work. Sarah bumped her shoulder gently against Emma's. But you can't carry the weight of every loss. You'll break. I know. I'm working on it. Emma paused. My therapist says the same thing. More eloquently, but same basic message. Sarah's eyebrows rose. You're seeing a therapist? Emma, that's wonderful. Don't sound so shocked, Emma said, but she was smiling. You were right. What you said that day in Boulder. I'd been hiding, not healing. 20 years of avoiding everything painful doesn't actually make the pain go away. It just makes you smaller. So I'm working on it. Actually dealing with Jacob's death instead of just surviving it. How's that going? Emma considered the question. Some days are harder than others, but I'm talking about him again. Remembering the good parts instead of just the end. That's progress, right? That's huge progress, Sarah said warmly. I'm proud of you. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Hope play. Then Emma heard it, the sound she'd been listening for without realizing it. A soft scraping on stone, rhythmic and familiar. She looked toward the tree line and saw a ghost. The leopard stood at the edge of the clearing, partially concealed by pines, watching the sanctuary with those intelligent golden eyes. Emma's heart lifted. Ghosts came and went as it pleased, sometimes disappearing for weeks at a time, roaming the high country where it had chosen to make its territory. But it always came back, checking on Hope, on Emma, as if maintaining a connection to the place that had given it freedom. Go on, Sarah said softly. I'll finish the morning rounds. Emma set down her coffee and walked into the clearing. Hope spotted her immediately and bounded over, rubbing against Emma's legs with a rumbling purr before racing off to investigate a particularly interesting snowbank. Ghost descended from the tree line slowly, moving with the regal grace of a creature perfectly adapted to its environment. The leopard looked healthy, well-fed, thriving. It had found a mate last spring, another snow leopard, not modified, just wild, and Emma had spotted them together on the high ridges. Life finding a way, despite everything humans had tried to impose on it. Ghost approached until it stood close enough for Emma to touch. She ran her hand along the leopard's thick winter coat, feeling the powerful muscles beneath, the steady heartbeat of a survivor. "You look good," Emma whispered. "Happy. I'm glad." Ghost's eyes held hers for a long moment, and Emma felt the weight of wordless communication pass between them. Gratitude, recognition, the bond forged in desperation and maintained by choice. Then Ghost turned its attention to Hope, who had noticed a larger leopard and was approaching with cautious excitement. The two touched noses, Ghost's low rumble mixing with Hope's higher-pitched greeting. For a moment, they moved together, Ghost grooming Hope's ears, Hope play bowing and swatting at Ghost's tail, and Emma's chest ached with bittersweet emotion. This was family, she realized. Not conventional, not natural, not anything she could have predicted, but family nonetheless, built from trauma and survival and the strange alchemy that transforms strangers into something irreplaceable. Sarah called from the porch. "Emma, the university team is here for the research session." "Right." Today they were conducting behavioral assessments on Hope, documenting her enhanced cognitive abilities. For a paper, Sarah was writing on the ethical implications of genetic modification. The work was important, helping establish legal frameworks to prevent future apex biotechs, providing data that could shape policy for decades. But right now, Emma just wanted to stand in the snow with two impossible leopards and feel grateful. "I have to go," she told Ghost. "But come back soon. You know you're always welcome here." Ghost's tail flicked once, acknowledgement. Then the leopard turned and bounded back toward the tree line. At the edge, it paused and looked back, and Emma lifted her hand in farewell. Then Ghost was gone, melting into the forest like the ghost it was named for. The research session went well. Hope demonstrated problem-solving abilities that impressed even the skeptical academics, working through puzzle feeders and spatial reasoning tests with ease that was both fascinating and slightly unsettling. This level of intelligence in a predator raised questions no one had good answers for yet. Questions Emma and Sarah were helping the scientific community grapple with. After the researchers left, Emma retreated to her office, a small room in the cabin filled with file boxes, computer equipment, and photographs documenting the sanctuary's first year. She had correspondence to answer, grant applications to review, a dozen administrative tasks that came with running a nonprofit organization. She was halfway through an email to a potential donor when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Emma almost didn't answer, but something made her accept the call. "Hello, Ms. Frost." A young male voice, nervous. "My name is David Kim. I'm a journalist with the Denver Post. I'm working on a follow-up story about the Apex Biotech case, and I was hoping you'd be willing to do an interview." Emma's stomach tightened. She'd done interviews before, carefully controlled, with Sarah present, focusing on the facts of the case. But she'd avoided the kind of personal storytelling that newspapers loved. The tragic widow angle, the woman alone in the mountains, all the narrative shortcuts that reduce her to a convenient archetype. "I don't think," she started. "Please," David interrupted. "I know you mostly declined interview requests. But this story isn't about exploitation. It's about what you've built here. The sanctuary, the rehabilitation. Work, the legal advocacy. You become a voice for animals who can't speak for themselves. People should know about that." Emma was quiet for a moment. "What angle are you taking?" "Redemption," David said simply. "Not just for the animals, but for you. How one woman went from hiding from the world to fighting to change it. How sometimes the things we find in our darkest moments become things that save us." Emma's throat tightened. "That's perceptive. I've done my research. And Ms. Frost? I lost my brother 3 years ago. I know what it's like to want to disappear. So when I read about what you've accomplished, about how you took that pain and turned it into purpose, I just think people need to hear that story, especially now. The world feels pretty dark sometimes. Stories like yours remind us that fighting back matters. Emma looked out her office window at the sanctuary spread below, at Hope sleeping in a patch of sunlight, at the enclosures housing the other subjects, at the life she'd built from the pieces of her shattered past. Okay, she heard herself say, I'll do the interview, but I have conditions. Name them. You don't make this about tragedy porn. You don't reduce Jacob's death to a plot point. And you let me review the final article before publication. Deal. David said immediately. Thank you, Miss Frost. This means a lot. After they hung up, Emma sat staring at her phone. Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding 2 sandwiches. Who was that? Sarah asked, handing Emma one of the sandwiches. A journalist. I said yes to an interview. Sarah's eyebrows rose. That's new. What changed your mind? Emma thought about David's words, about redemption and purpose, about how the things that nearly destroy us can also become the foundation for something new. I'm tired of hiding, Emma said. If telling my story helps someone else find the courage to face their pain, to fight for something that matters, then it's worth being uncomfortable for a few hours. Sarah smiled. Look at you, growing and healing. I'm impressed. Don't get too excited. I'll probably have a panic attack halfway through the interview and call you to rescue me. I'll keep my phone on, Sarah promised. They ate lunch together, talking about the upcoming congressional testimony, about a potential collaboration with a university studying climate adaptation and wildlife, about Hope's progress, normal conversation, work conversation, the kind of dialogue Emma had thought she'd never have again after Jacob died. But here she was, living, working, building something that mattered. It wasn't perfect. She still had hard days when the grief felt fresh. She still woke sometimes from nightmares about the facility, about arriving too late to save Hope, about ghosts being recaptured. Her therapist said those nightmares might never fully disappear, that trauma left scars even when wounds healed. But scars were proof of survival, evidence that you'd faced something terrible and lived. Emma could accept that. 2 months later, Washington, D.C., Emma stood in the hallway outside the congressional hearing room, smoothing her suit jacket with nervous hands. She'd never been comfortable in formal clothes, and the suit Sarah had helped her pick out felt like a costume. But she looked professional, serious, credible, all things that matter when you were about to testify before the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. Sarah stood beside her, offering silent support. They'd flown out together the day before, and Sarah had spent the evening helping Emma prepare, running through potential questions, coaching her on how to stay calm under pressure. Remember, Sarah said now, you're not on trial. You're a witness. Just tell the truth about what you saw, what you experienced. Let your story speak for itself. What if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm just some crazy mountain woman who... Emma, Sarah took her hands. You have evidence. You have testimony from multiple witnesses. You have convictions in a federal trial. They'll believe you because what you're saying is true. Now breathe. Emma breathed. The committee aide appeared. Ms. Frost? They're ready for you. Emma walked into the hearing room on legs that felt like they might give out. The space was imposing. High ceilings with paneling. Senators seated in a raised semicircle like judges. Cameras lined the back wall. This would be recorded broadcast, dissected by media outlets across the country. No pressure. She took her seat at the witness table, adjusted the microphone, and met the eyes of Senator Williams, the committee chair. Ms. Frost, Williams said, her voice formal but not unkind. Thank you for appearing before this committee. We've reviewed your written testimony regarding the Apex Biotech facility and the genetic modification program conducted there. Today, we'd like to hear your first-hand account of what you discovered. Emma cleared her throat. Thank you, Senator. I'll do my best. And she did. For the next 2 hours, Emma told her story. Not the sanitized version, not the careful talking points Sarah had helped her prepare, but the real, messy, emotional truth of it. She described living alone in the mountains for 20 years, drowning in grief she couldn't name. She talked about finding ghosts caught in that snare, about the 6 weeks spent nursing a dying leopard back to health while wondering if she was saving it or just postponing the inevitable. She described the morning ghost returned, scratching at the cliff face, leading her to a discovery that would change everything. She told him about the facility, the cages, the experiments, the cub dying alone in the darkness, about Dr. Marsh's cold calculation of profit over suffering, about the choice Emma had made to risk everything to save creatures that technically weren't hers to save, that legally didn't even exist. And she told him about the aftermath, the sanctuary, the rehabilitation work. The ongoing fight to ensure what happened at Apex Biotech could never happen again. When she finished, the committee room was silent. Emma could hear her own heartbeat, loud in the hush. Then Senator Williams spoke, and Emma heard something unexpected in her voice. Emotion. Ms. Frost, what you did required tremendous courage. You were one woman against a well-funded corporation with powerful connections, and you didn't back down. On behalf of this committee, and I think I speak for many Americans, thank you. Your actions likely saved dozens of animals and exposed a program that violated both the spirit and letter of our environmental protection laws. Emma's eyes burned. I just did what anyone would have done. No. Another senator interjected, a man Emma recognized from news coverage. Most people would have walked away, would have convinced themselves it wasn't their problem. You didn't. That makes you extraordinary. I had help, Emma said, glancing back at Sarah in the gallery. I couldn't have done any of it alone. The questioning continued for another hour. Technical details about the facility, clarifications about the genetic modification process, discussions about regulatory oversight. Emma answered as honestly as she could, never pretending to know more than she did, admitting uncertainty when appropriate. Finally, Senator Williams called for a recess, and Emma was released. She walked out of the hearing room in a daze, barely registering Sarah hugging her or the journalist calling questions or the camera flashes. It wasn't until they were safely in a taxi heading back to the hotel that the reality hit her. She'd done it, testified before Congress, told her story to the people who could actually change policy, prevent future abuses, create legal protections for animals like Ghost and Hope. You were amazing, Sarah said, squeezing Emma's hand. Seriously, I'm so proud of you. Emma laughed shakily. I think I blacked out halfway through. Did I actually say something about drowning in grief? That seems dramatic. It was honest, and honesty is what makes testimony powerful. Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. The interview with David Kim just went live. It's already trending on social media. Trending? As in people are reading it. Sharing it, commenting on it. Emma, you're having a moment. Emma wasn't sure how she felt about having a moment, but when they got back to the hotel room and Sarah pulled up the article on her laptop, Emma found herself reading with something close to wonder. David had kept his promise. The piece wasn't exploitation or tragedy porn. It was honest, a portrait of a woman who'd lost everything, who'd spent 20 years hiding from life, who'd been dragged back into the world by a leopard that refused to let her keep hiding. The comments below the article made Emma's throat tight. This story gave me hope during the hardest time of my life. Thank you, Emma Frost. I lost my husband 2 years ago and have been barely surviving. Reading about Emma fighting her way back to living, I think I needed to see that it's possible. The world needs more people like this. Someone who sees suffering and can't walk away even when it costs them everything. Emma closed the laptop, overwhelmed. I'm not a hero, she said quietly. I just did what I had to do. That's what all heroes say, Sarah replied. Now come on. We're going to dinner to celebrate your successful testimony, and I'm not taking no for an answer. Spring, the sanctuary. Emma stood in the meadow behind the main cabin, watching Hope and one of the other rescued subjects, a male they'd named Atlas, play fighting in the tall grass. The snow had melted weeks ago, revealing a landscape transformed by spring. Wildflowers dotted the meadow. Birds sang from the pines. The world felt alive in a way Emma had almost forgotten was possible. Ghosts appeared at the tree line, and Emma's heart lifted. The leopard came less frequently now, busy with its wildlife, its mate its territory, but it still returned, maintaining the bond that had started everything. This time, Ghost wasn't alone. Emma's breath caught as two cubs tumbled out of the underbrush, wrestling with each other. Ghost cubs, born wild, untouched by human manipulation, exactly as leopards were meant to be. Tears blurred Emma's vision. This was what she'd fought for, not just to save Ghost and Hope, but to give them a chance to live as fully as their circumstances allowed. Ghost free in the wilderness, raising the next generation. Hope safe in the sanctuary, teaching humans about the consequences of playing God with nature, both surviving, both thriving, each in their own way. Ghost led the cubs across the meadow, showing them Emma like a proud parent. The cubs were curious, approaching with the fearlessness of young things who hadn't yet learned to be afraid. Emma knelt in the grass and let them sniff her hands, their tiny paws batting at her fingers. "They're beautiful," Emma whispered to Ghost. "Perfect." Ghost's purr rumbled through the clearing. The leopard touched its nose to Emma's forehead, the gesture they'd shared since those first days of healing. And Emma felt the weight of everything they'd been through together. The pain of finding Ghost dying in a snare, the terror of the facility, the desperate fight to expose the truth, the slow, difficult work of building something good from the wreckage. And here, on the other side of all that suffering, this moment, new life born free, playing in spring sunlight. Redemption felt too small a word for what Emma felt. Sarah's voice called from the cabin. "Emma, the Attorney General's office is on the phone. They want to discuss using our model for wildlife protection legislation." Emma stood, brushing grass from her jeans. "I'll be right there." She looked at Ghost one more time. "You know you'll always have a home here, right? You and your family. Wild or not, there's always a place for you." Ghost's eyes held hers. Understanding, acceptance, something that transcended the boundaries between species. Then the leopard gathered its cubs and bounded back into the forest, taking its wildlife back into the mountains where it belonged. Emma walked toward the cabin, toward the ringing phone, and the work waiting, and the future she was still learning to build. Hope fell into step beside her, and Emma rested her hand on the young leopard's head. "Come on," she said softly. "We got work to do." The sanctuary spread around them, safe, purposeful, alive with possibility. Emma had spent 20 years convinced she had nothing left to offer the world, that her life had ended the day Jacob died, and everything after was just going through motions. She'd been wrong. Her life hadn't ended. It had transformed, broken open by grief, yes, but also by a leopard that refused to let her keep hiding, by the discovery of cruelty that demanded a response, by the choice to fight when fighting seemed impossible. And in fighting, she found what she thought was lost forever: purpose, connection, hope. Emma stepped onto the porch, Hope curling up in a patch of sunlight, and picked up the phone to discuss how her sanctuary could become a blueprint for protecting animals across the country. Behind her, in the mountains, Ghost ran free with its cubs, both surviving, both thriving. And Emma, for the first time in 20 years, felt truly, completely alive. The documentary crew had been at the sanctuary for 3 days, and Emma still wasn't comfortable with the cameras. She stood near the main enclosure, trying to ignore the lens pointed at her while explaining Hope's feeding schedule to the interviewer, a woman named Rachel whose enthusiasm felt genuine even if it made Emma slightly uncomfortable. "So, Hope can't hunt for herself?" Rachel asked, her microphone extended toward Emma. "No," Emma said, watching Hope sunbathe on her favorite boulder. The leopard was 5 years old now, fully grown, magnificent despite the limitations built into her genetics. Her respiratory system, while much improved from when we first rescued her, still can't handle the sustained exertion required for hunting. She also lacks some of the instinctive behaviors that wild leopards develop. The genetic modifications enhanced certain traits, but disrupted others. But she's happy here. Emma smiled. "Watch her for 5 minutes, and tell me if she looks unhappy." As if on cue, Hope rolled onto her back, stretching luxuriously in the sun, paws batting at a butterfly that had ventured too close. Rachel laughed, and even the camera operator cracked a smile. "Point taken," Rachel said. "Now, I understand Ghost still visits occasionally? The original leopard who led you to the facility." "Yes, less frequently than in the early years. But yes, Ghost has established a territory in the high country with a mate, a truly wild snow leopard. They've had 3 litters together. We've documented 9 cubs total over 5 years, all thriving in their natural habitat. That must feel incredible, knowing that despite everything Apex Biotech did, Ghost found a way to live authentically. Emma's throat tightened. It's the only thing that makes any of this bearable. The 11 subjects who died before hope, the years of suffering Ghost endured. Knowing that it survived and built a real life helps balance the scales a little. Not entirely, but a little. Rachel's expression softened. You still carry that weight. The ones you couldn't save. Every single day, Emma admitted, my therapist says that might never fully go away, and I'm learning to accept that. Some griefs become part of who you are. You don't get over them. You just get stronger at carrying them. The interview continued for another hour. They filmed Hope eating, playing with enrichment toys, interacting with Emma. They documented the other enclosures. Atlas, now a massive male who served as an ambassador animal for educational programs, and Winter, a female who'd been recovered from a satellite facility and couldn't survive without temperature-controlled habitat. Finally, Rachel asked the question Emma had been expecting. 5 years ago, you were a woman living in isolation, hiding from the world after your husband's death. Now you're running one of the most innovative wildlife sanctuaries in the country. You've testified before Congress multiple times. You've consulted on wildlife protection legislation in 4 states. How do you reconcile those 2 versions of yourself? Emma was quiet for a long moment, thinking. The camera kept rolling, capturing her silence, but Rachel didn't rush her. I don't think they're different versions, Emma said finally. The woman who hid in the mountains for 20 years. She was surviving the only way she knew how. And the woman I am now, she's still that same person, still carrying the same losses, the same scars. The difference is I'm not facing them alone anymore. She gestured to the sanctuary spread around them. Ghost gave me a reason to stop hiding. Sarah gave me support to keep fighting when I wanted to give up. Hope gave me something to protect. And slowly, piece by piece, I remembered that being broken doesn't mean being useless. Sometimes the broken places are where the light gets in. Rachel's eyes were wet. That's beautiful. It's also a quote, Emma admitted with a small smile. Leonard Cohen, I think, but it's true anyway. After the crew packed up and left, Emma retreated to her office and found Sarah waiting with 2 glasses of wine. You survived, Sarah said, handing Emma a glass. I'm proud of you. I know media stuff still makes you anxious. It does, Emma confirmed, sinking into her chair. But it's getting easier. And if doing interviews helps spread awareness about genetic modification ethics, about wildlife protection, about what happened here, it's worth being uncomfortable. Sarah raised her glass. To being uncomfortable for good reasons. They clinked glasses and drank. Outside the window, the last light of day painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Emma never got tired of that view. Never took for granted the privilege of living surrounded by wilderness that was both beautiful and dangerous, harsh and healing. The university confirmed the grant, Sarah said, pulling out her phone to show Emma an email. Full funding for 3 years to study long-term effects of genetic modification on behavior and physiology. They want us to be the primary research site. Emma read the email twice, letting the words sink in. 3 years of funding meant stability. Meant they could expand their rehabilitation programs, hire more staff, maybe even rescue subjects from other facilities if any were discovered. That's incredible, Emma breathed. Sarah, this could change everything. It already has changed everything, Sarah said quietly. 5 years ago, genetic modification of wildlife was happening in the shadows, completely unregulated. Now, because of what you expose, there are laws, oversight, accountability. The work we're doing here isn't just saving individual animals. It's reshaping how society thinks about the ethics of playing God with nature. Emma felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. It was heavy, but she'd learned to carry heavy things. She'd been doing it for years now. Speaking of playing God, Sarah continued, I got an interesting call today from Dr. Marcus Webb. Emma's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Webb? The researcher from Apex. The same. He's out of prison. Served 4 years of his 7-year sentence. Got early release for good behavior. Sarah's expression was carefully neutral. He wants to meet with you. Absolutely not. That was my first reaction too. But Emma, hear me out. He says he has information about other subjects that were never recovered, ones that Apex moved to off-site locations before the raid. Emma's blood went cold. There are more? He claims there were at least 5 subjects transferred to a partner facility in Montana. He says he'll give us the location, help us plan a rescue, but only if he can meet with you first, face to face. Emma set down her wine glass before she dropped it. Her hands were shaking. Why me? Why does he need to meet with me? He didn't say. But Emma, if there are more subjects suffering in some facility, if we could save them... I know, Emma interrupted. Her mind was already racing, calculating risks and possibilities. Meeting with Webb meant confronting one of the men responsible for Ghost's suffering, for Hope's near death, for the 11 subjects who died. It meant looking into the eyes of someone who treated living creatures as experimental materials and somehow finding composure to have a conversation. But if it meant saving more animals from what Hope had endured, set it up, Emma heard herself say. Tell him I'll meet with him. Here, at the sanctuary, with you present. Those are my terms. Sarah nodded. I'll make the call. After Sarah left, Emma sat alone in her office as darkness fell outside. She thought about the years since that morning when Ghost had first scratched at the cliff face. Thought about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. Thought about the woman she'd been, hollow, hiding, barely surviving, and the woman she'd become. Not fearless. She still felt fear every day, but no longer paralyzed by it. Not healed. The grief of losing Jacob still surfaced at unexpected moments, but no longer drowning in it. Not perfect. She still had panic attacks, still struggled with intimacy and trust, still sometimes wanted to run back to the mountains and hide from the world. But fighting, always fighting, for the animals who couldn't fight for themselves, for the truth even when it was uncomfortable, for a future where what happened at Apex Biotech could never happen again. Emma pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo she kept in a private folder. Jacob, grinning at the camera, a sunset behind him painting the sky in impossible colors. Taken 2 weeks before the avalanche that killed him, before Emma's world shattered. I think you'd be proud of me, she whispered to the photo. I'm finally living again. Not just surviving, actually living. It took a genetically modified leopard in a secret facility and nearly dying a few times. But I got here. I found my way back. The photo didn't answer, but Emma felt something settle in her chest. Not closure. She'd learned that grief didn't really close, but acceptance. Permission to keep going, to keep building a life that mattered, even though the person she wanted to build it with was gone. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lisa, the technician who'd helped Emma rescue Hope, and now worked at the sanctuary full-time. Thermal imaging shows movement on the North Ridge. 3 heat signatures. Could be Ghost. Emma's heart jumped. She grabbed her coat and headed out into the night. The North Ridge was a 20-minute hike from the main compound, following a trail Emma could walk blindfolded by now. She carried a flashlight but barely needed it. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows, and she knew every root and rock along this path. Lisa waited at the ridge overlook, thermal scanner in hand. They're just below the tree line, she said quietly, pointing. 1 large adult, 2 smaller, probably yearlings. I think it's Ghost's latest litter. Emma lifted her binoculars and scanned the slope. At first she saw nothing, then movement, a pale shape emerging from shadows. Ghost, larger than Emma remembered, moving with the confident grace of a predator in its prime. Behind Ghost came 2 yearling cubs, not quite full-grown, practicing the stalking behaviors they'd need for hunting. Emma's breath caught. Every time she saw a Ghost, the impact hit her fresh. This creature that should have died in a laboratory, this miracle of resilience and survival, this living reminder that life found ways around even the cruelest human interventions. Ghost seemed to sense Emma's presence. The leopard turned its head, golden eyes finding Emma across the distance. For a long moment, they looked at each other, woman and leopard, rescuer and rescued, two survivors who'd shaped each other's fates. Then Ghost did something Emma had never seen before. The leopard turned to its cubs and made a low vocalization, and the yearlings approached cautiously. Ghost led them up the slope toward where Emma stood, a deliberate choice to bring them closer instead of retreating. Lisa grabbed Emma's arm. "Emma, what's it doing?" "I don't know," Emma whispered. Ghost stopped 50 feet away, well within visual range but still maintaining safe distance. The yearlings pressed close to their parent, watching Emma with curious, unafraid eyes. And Emma understood. Ghost was introducing them, showing the next generation that this place, the sanctuary, Emma, the structures of human habitation visible in the valley below, was safe. That not all humans were a threat. That if the yearlings ever needed help, ever found themselves in danger, this was where they could come. Emma's vision blurred with tears. "You're teaching them," she said, though Ghost couldn't possibly understand the words. "Teaching them that I'm safe, that this place is safe." Ghost held her gaze a moment longer, then turned and led the yearlings back down the slope, disappearing into forest like smoke dissolving into darkness. Lisa released a shaky breath. I don't even have words for what that was. "Trust," Emma said quietly. "That was trust. After everything humans did to Ghost, after the pain and the experiments in the cages, it still chose to trust, to teach its young that trust is possible." They stood on the ridge for a long time after Ghost left, neither speaking, both processing what they'd witnessed. Finally, Lisa broke the silence. "Sarah told me about Webb wanting to meet with you, about the potential subjects in Montana." "Yeah." Emma's voice was heavy. "Are you okay with that? Seeing him again?" Emma considered the question. "No, but I'll do it anyway. Because if there's even a chance we can save more animals from what Hope went through, I have to try, even if it means facing someone I'd rather never see again." Lisa was quiet for a moment. "You know you're basically a superhero, right? Like, in a completely non-ironic way that word should be used." Emma laughed despite herself. "I'm really not. I'm just someone who can't walk away from suffering when I see it. That's not heroic. It's just human, or what being human should be, anyway." "Most humans walk away," Lisa said softly. "Most people see something wrong and convince themselves it's not their problem. You didn't. That matters." They walked back to the compound together, and Emma thought about Lisa's words, about all the people who'd helped along the way. Sarah, Dr. Martinez, the federal agents who'd raided the facility, the lawyers who'd prosecuted Apex, the journalists who'd kept the story alive, the donors who funded the sanctuary. She hadn't done any of it alone. The myth of the lone hero was exactly that, a myth. Real change required communities, networks, people willing to support each other in doing difficult things. Emma had spent 20 years alone, and it had nearly destroyed her. The last 5 years, surrounded by people who cared, had brought her back to life. That was the real lesson, she thought. Not that individual courage didn't matter, but that courage flourished in connection. That the strongest thing anyone could do was reach out when they were drowning and accept the hands offered in return. 3 days later, Dr. Marcus Webb looked older than Emma remembered. He'd aged more than 4 years in prison. His hair had gone mostly gray. Deep lines carved his face, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had been damaged by circumstances. But his eyes were the same. Sharp, analytical, the eyes of someone who saw the world as a series of problems to be solved. They met in the sanctuary's conference room, neutral ground. Sarah sat beside Emma, a silent presence of support. Lisa had positioned herself near the door, ostensibly taking notes, but really serving as backup in case Webb turned out to be dangerous. Webb sat across the table, hands folded, studying Emma with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," he said finally. His voice was rough, like he wasn't used to speaking much anymore. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Emma said, her tone harder than she felt. "Sarah says you have information about subjects that were never recovered." Webb nodded slowly. Before the facility was raided, Dr. Marsh transferred 5 subjects to a partner facility in Montana. She saw the investigation coming. "You'd already uploaded those photos to your contact, and she knew it was only a matter of time. The Montana site was her insurance policy. If Apex went down, she'd still have subjects to continue the research. Continue the research? Emma's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. The research that killed 11 animals and nearly killed Hope? That research? I know how it sounds, Webb said quietly. But you have to understand, the potential applications of that work could save millions of lives. Soldiers able to operate in extreme climates. Rescue workers who could survive conditions that currently kill them. The adaptation protocols we developed were developed by torturing animals, Emma interrupted. Don't dress it up as noble scientific inquiry. You took living creatures and experimented on them until they died or wished they had. That's not research. That's cruelty with a clipboard. Webb's jaw tightened. You're right. The admission shocked Emma into silence. You're right, Webb repeated. I told myself for years that the ends justified the means, that the suffering of a few animals was acceptable if it led to breakthroughs that could help humanity. I wrote in my reports. I presented it to oversight committees. I convinced myself it was true. He looked down at his hands. Then I spent 4 years in prison, and I had a lot of time to think, to really sit with what we'd done. And I realized something. The moment you start justifying cruelty for the greater good, you've already lost your humanity, because there is no greater good built on a foundation of suffering. There's just suffering multiplied. Emma studied him, trying to determine if this was genuine remorse or calculated manipulation. If you feel so terrible about it, why didn't you stop? Why didn't you speak up before I exposed the facility? Fear, Webb said simply. Fear of losing my career, my reputation, my funding. Fear of admitting I'd wasted years of my life on work that was fundamentally unethical. Fear is a powerful motivator, Ms. Frost. It makes cowards of people who should know better. He met her eyes. But you weren't afraid. Or you were. But you acted anyway. You saw something wrong and you fought to stop it, even knowing it could cost you everything. That's why I wanted to meet with you. To understand what makes someone capable of that kind of courage when people like me aren't. Emma was quiet for a long moment. I was terrified every single day, she said finally. When I broke into that facility, when I ran from your security team, when I faced down Dr. Marsh, I was absolutely terrified. But I looked at Hope die in that cage, and I looked at ghosts who come back to ask for help, and I realized being afraid was less important than doing the right thing. She leaned forward. But here's what you need to understand, Dr. Webb. Courage isn't some special quality certain people have and others don't. It's a choice. You chose to prioritize your career over the welfare of the animals in your care. I chose differently. We both made choices. Neither of us gets to pretend we didn't have agency in how things turned out. Webb nodded slowly. You're right again. He pulled a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. The Montana facility. Complete location, security details, transfer records showing which subjects were moved there. Everything you need to plan a rescue. Emma opened the folder and scanned the contents. 5 subjects, 3 females, 2 males, all showing signs of genetic instability similar to Hope's early deterioration, all being kept in conditions that made Apex's facility look humane. Her stomach turned. How long have they been there? Almost 5 years now, since right before your discovery of our facility. 5 years. 5 years of suffering that could have been prevented if Emma had found Apex sooner, if Webb had spoken up sooner, if any of 100 different decisions had been made differently. Why now? Emma demanded. Why give me this information now, after 5 years? Because I'm dying, Webb said flatly. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. I have maybe 6 months left, and I'd like to spend them trying to repair some of the damage I caused. This seemed like a place to start. Emma felt no satisfaction in the news, just a hollow sadness that it had taken a terminal diagnosis for Webb to find his conscience. What do you want from me? She asked. Forgiveness? I can't give you that. What you did was unforgivable. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Webb said. I'm asking you to save those 5 animals before it's too late. And I'm offering to help however I can. I know the security systems, the facility layout, the personnel. I can give you everything you need to get them out safely. Emma looked at Sarah, who'd been silent throughout the conversation. Sarah gave a small nod. The information appeared legitimate. Okay, Emma said. We'll plan a rescue. But Dr. Webb, if this is some kind of trap, if you're working with Marsh or anyone else to... It's not a trap, Webb interrupted. I give you my word. Your word doesn't mean much to me. No, he agreed. I suppose it doesn't. But it's all I have to offer. The rescue took 3 weeks to plan. Emma worked with Sarah, Lisa, Dr. Martinez, and a team of federal wildlife agents who were eager to shut down another illegal facility. Webb provided detailed intelligence, guard schedules, camera positions, security vulnerabilities. True to his word, he asked nothing in return except updates on the planning. The night before the raid, Emma stood in Hope's enclosure, watching the leopard sleep. Tomorrow, if everything went according to plan, 5 more subjects would be free. 5 more animals would get the chance Hope had gotten. To live safely, to heal, to exist without fear. But Emma had learned enough about operations like this to know that, according to plan, was optimistic at best. You're thinking too loud. Emma turned to find Sarah approaching, 2 mugs of hot chocolate in hand, a tradition they developed over the years. Hot chocolate before difficult conversations or challenging days. Just worrying, Emma admitted, accepting a mug. What if something goes wrong? What if we get there and the subjects are already dead? What if Webb's information is bad? Then we deal with it, Sarah said calmly, just like we've dealt with everything else. Emma, you can't control every outcome. You can only control your choices. And you've chosen to try. That's enough. Is it though? Hope was dying when I found her. If I'd been an hour later, a day later... But you weren't, Sarah interrupted gently. You were exactly when you needed to be. And tomorrow, you'll be exactly when you need to be for those 5 animals in Montana. Trust that. Emma sipped her chocolate, letting the warmth spread through her chest. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too traumatized and noticed for the first 15 years we knew each other. Emma laughed despite her anxiety. Fair point. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Hope sleep. The leopard's breathing was steady, peaceful, a living testament to what was possible when people chose compassion over cruelty. Whatever happens tomorrow, Emma said quietly, thank you for everything, for believing me 5 years ago, for dropping your entire life to help, for staying through all of this. I couldn't have done any of it without you. Yes, you could have, Sarah said. You would have found a way. But I'm glad you didn't have to do it alone. Emma leaned her head on Sarah's shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over the years of rebuilt friendship. Still, thank you. You're welcome. Now come on, we both need sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Montana, the raid. The facility was hidden in a valley between 2 mountains, accessible only by a single dirt road that wound through dense forest. Emma crouched in the tree line with Sarah and the federal agents, watching through binoculars as guards patrolled the perimeter. Webb's intelligence had been accurate. Everything was exactly where he'd said it would be. Agent Rodriguez, who was leading the operation, spoke into his radio. All units in position. We execute in 5 minutes. Remember, our priority is securing the subjects safely. These are living creatures who've been through hell. We treat them accordingly. Emma's heart hammered. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until they either saved 5 animals or discovered they were too late. The minutes crawled by. Then Rodriguez gave the signal, and everything happened at once. Federal agents moved in from 3 sides, sirens wailing, voices shouting commands. The facility's guards, caught completely by surprise, surrendered almost immediately. Within 15 minutes, the site was secured. Clear, someone shouted. No resistance. Emma ran toward the main building with Sarah at her heels. They burst through the door into a space that looked disturbingly similar to Apex's facility. Cages, computers, medical equipment. The smell of antiseptic and fear. And in the back corner, 5 cages. 5 subjects. Emma's breath left her in a rush. They were alive. Emaciated, clearly suffering, but alive. She approached the first cage slowly. A female leopard, smaller than Hope, watched her with dull eyes. No curiosity, no hope, just exhausted resignation. "We're getting you out," Emma whispered. "I promise. We're getting all of you out." Dr. Martinez appeared with sedation equipment. "We need to tranquilize them for transport. They're too weak to handle the stress otherwise." Over the next hour, they carefully sedated each subject and loaded them into specialized transport vehicles. Emma stayed with them the entire time, murmuring reassurances she wasn't sure they could hear or understand. The youngest subject, a male yearling, almost didn't make it. His heart rate dropped dangerously during sedation, and for a terrifying moment Emma thought they'd rescued him only to watch him die. But Dr. Martinez worked frantically, and finally the yearling's heartbeat stabilized. "He's going to make it," Martinez said, exhausted. "They're all going to make it." Emma sank to the ground, her legs giving out. 5 years these animals had suffered in this place. 5 years of pain that could have been prevented if someone had acted sooner. But they were out now, safe, on their way to the sanctuary where they'd receive the care they should have had from the beginning. Sarah knelt beside Emma, pulling her into a hug. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Emma corrected, her voice muffled against Sarah's shoulder. "All of us." As the transport vehicles pulled away, Emma looked back at the facility. Federal agents were already documenting everything, building the case that would shut this place down permanently and prosecute everyone involved. Another facility closed. Another victory in the long fight against cruelty disguised as science. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance the scales for all the animals who died, who'd suffered, who'd never gotten their chance at rescue. But it was something, and Emma had learned that sometimes something was all you could hold on to. 6 months later, full circle. Emma stood on the ridge where it had all begun, 5.5 years after ghosts had first scratched at the cliff face. The hidden entrance to Apex's facility had been sealed permanently. The cave system collapse to prevent anyone from ever using it again. Nature was already reclaiming the site. Grass growing over disturbed earth, trees pushing through cracks in concrete. In another few years, you wouldn't be able to tell humans had ever been here. The 5 Montana subjects were all thriving at the sanctuary. 2 had recovered enough that they might eventually be released into protected wilderness. The other 3, like Hope, would live out their lives in the sanctuary's care. Webb had died 4 months ago. Emma had visited him in the hospital once, the week before he passed. He looked almost peaceful, the guilt that carved lines into his face finally eased by the knowledge that his information had led to the rescue. Emma had still not forgiven him. Probably never would. But she thanked him for helping save those 5 animals, and that had been enough for both of them. Now, standing on the ridge as the sun set, Emma heard the familiar sound of paws on stone. She turned and saw a ghost approaching, alone this time. The leopard was older now, moving with just a hint of stiffness in its hind legs. Not old by snow leopard standards, but showing its age. Ghost reached Emma and pressed its head against her leg, purring. Emma sank to her knees and wrapped her arms around the leopard's neck, burying her face in thick fur. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for leading me here, for trusting me, for showing me that hiding from life wasn't the same as living it." Ghost's purr intensified, a rumbling vibration that Emma felt in her bones. They stayed like that for a long time, woman and leopard, 2 survivors who'd shaped each other's destinies. The sun painted the mountains in gold and crimson, and for a moment, the world felt perfectly balanced. Not healed, never fully healed, but balanced. Finally, Ghost pulled away and started back toward the high country. At the tree line, the leopard paused and looked back, golden eyes meeting Emma's one last time. Then Ghost was gone, melting into the forest like smoke. Like a ghost, like the wild thing it had always been beneath the modifications humans had forced onto it. Emma stood on the ridge, watching the place where Ghost had disappeared, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not grief, though that was always present. Not joy, though she felt that too. Gratitude. Gratitude for the leopard that had refused to let her keep hiding. Gratitude for the pain that had cracked her open enough to let light in. Gratitude for every person who'd helped along the way. every small victory, every animal saved, gratitude for being alive to witness it all. She pulled out her phone and took a photo of the sunset, the mountains, the ridge where her life had changed. Then she sent it to Sarah with a simple message. Heading home. See you soon. Sarah's response came immediately. Dinner's almost ready. Hope misses you. Emma smiled and started down the trail toward the sanctuary, toward the life she'd built from the wreckage of her past, toward the future that still held possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. Behind her, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent, holding their secrets close. But Emma had learned something over the past 5.5 years. Mountains might keep secrets, but they also reveal them to those who paid attention, to those who looked past the surface beauty to the complex, interconnected systems beneath, to those who understood that everything, animals, ecosystems, humans, was more fragile and more resilient than anyone realized. As she walked toward home, toward hope in Sarah and the work that would fill her days for years to come, Emma Frost felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not the peace of endings or conclusions. Not the peace of problems solved or grief fully processed. The peace of knowing she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The peace of a life lived with purpose. And for a woman who'd spent 20 years hiding from life itself, that was more than she'd ever dared to hope for. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.